Imagine you drop off hundreds of domestic sheep on a tiny island in the middle of an icy ocean, then just walk away and forget about them for half a century. What happens? Death? Extinction? Catastrophe? Wrong. The story of Campbell Island will flip everything you thought you knew about survival and evolution. Subscribe to the channel. Things are about to get interesting. Campbell Island sits more than 600 kilometers south of New Zealand's coast, practically halfway to Antarctica. It's a subantarctic outpost ruled by eternal winds, freezing rain, and temperatures that rarely climb above 5 degrees even in summer. There are no trees here, only dwarf shrubs and bizarre giant herbs. When Europeans first spotted the island in the early 19th century, they found no mammals except fur seals on the shore. Birds nested everywhere. Plants grew without any threat from herbivores. The ecosystem had existed in isolation for millions of years, forming a unique balance that would soon be shattered by human greed. In the late 19th century, New Zealand was actively handing out grazing licenses for remote islands. The idea was simple: lease wild land, bring in sheep, shear wool, make profit. Nobody thought about ecological consequences. Campbell Island seemed like a perfect candidate. After all, there was plenty of greenery and no predators. In 1896, a farmer named James Gordon from Gisborne decided to try his luck. He leased the entire island from the government, gathered 400 merino sheep and their crosses, loaded them onto a ship along with building materials, and sent them across the raging ocean to this God-forsaken piece of land. Gordon planned to build a sheep station, hire shepherds, and establish regular wool shipments to the mainland. The first months seemed promising. Sheep grazed on lush megaherbs. The weather was harsh, but the animals survived. However, Gordon soon faced reality. Transportation costs were enormous, and wool prices started dropping. By 1900, Gordon went bankrupt and surrendered his lease. His place was taken by Captain Tucker, a more ambitious and less cautious entrepreneur. Tucker decided the problem was scale. He started bringing in sheep by the hundreds, shipment after shipment. By 1913, about 8,000 head grazed on the island. The flock exploded incredibly fast. Sheep multiplied in conditions where there were no wolves, no wild dogs, not even foxes. Their only enemies were cold, wind, and their own hunger. Pastures began to fail. Delicate megaherbs, evolved without herbivorous mammals, couldn't recover from intensive grazing. Campbell Island's megaherbs are a true wonder of nature. Plants with leaves the size of dinner plates and flowers brighter than tropical orchids. Ross's giant lily can grow up to 1 meter tall, its golden inflorescences visible from far away. Chlorophyllum with huge glossy leaves creates actual meadows that look like fairy tale landscapes. These plants developed such sizes to capture scarce sunlight as efficiently as possible in conditions of constant cloud cover and short summer days. Their massive leaves work like solar panels, while dense fuzz protects against icy wind. But for sheep used to regular grass, this diet was far from ideal. By 1916, the lease was bought by 2 businessmen from the Otago region. They founded the Campbell Island Company and hired permanent shepherds and shearers who lived on the island for a year at a time. Working conditions were brutal. People lived in primitive huts exposed to all winds, going months without fresh vegetables or fruit. Shepherds told how the wind on the island never stops. It can blow for weeks without a break, knocking you down and forcing you to crawl on all fours. Rain falls 300 days a year, and fog gets so thick you can get lost 10 meters from your own hut. Only the most desperate or most despairing could work in such conditions. In 1927, the lease was acquired by a farmer named John Warren. This was his last chance to strike it rich. Warren invested all his money in the project, brought another 5,000 sheep, repaired buildings, and hired new workers. For a brief time, it seemed the enterprise would finally turn a profit. But in 1929, the Great Depression hit. Prices for wool and mutton crashed worldwide. What had cost £1 a week ago now wasn't worth a shilling. Warren could no longer pay for transport, couldn't pay workers, couldn't even feed himself. The island turned from a gold mine into a financial noose around his neck. In 1931, something incredible happened. The rescue ship that was supposed to pick up workers was 2 years late. Yes, you heard that right, 2 years. People were stranded on the island without communication, without supplies, without hope. They survived on mutton and rare plants, just trying to live until rescue. When a ship finally arrived, the gaunt, bearded shepherds swore never to return to that cursed island. Warren was completely ruined. The company officially liquidated in 1934. The lease was canceled and the island returned to government control. And the sheep? About 4,000 animals were simply abandoned to their fate. Imagine a domestic sheep bred by centuries of selection for farm life. It depends on humans for everything, from winter feeding to summer shearing, from protection against predators to treatment of diseases. Now imagine 4,000 such creatures suddenly left in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth. The first years were catastrophic. Sheep, unshorn for years, grew wool to absurd sizes. Some animals carried 20-30 kilograms of wet, dirty fleece. This isn't protection, it's a curse. Wet wool becomes heavier than stone, drags you down, prevents movement, causes skin infections and rot. Sheep began dying by the hundreds. Some couldn't find enough food. Others collapsed from exhaustion under the weight of their own wool. Still others froze in wet fleeces during particularly vicious storms. Lambs born in spring often died in their first days of life, not adapted to the reality of wild nature. Disease mowed down the flock. Without veterinary help, any infection became a death sentence. Parasites brought from the mainland multiplied in warm, moist wool. Foot rot spread like wildfire. By the end of the 30s, the population had shrunk, by estimates, to 1,000 or even fewer head. It seemed like the end. Another decade and the last sheep would die from hunger or cold. The story would end as another sad example of human stupidity and cruelty to animals. But nature had a surprise. Among thousands of the doomed were found a few whose genes turned out slightly more suitable for survival in hell. Natural selection isn't a pretty metaphor from a biology textbook. It's a brutal, blind, merciless machine that grinds up the weak and leaves only the most adapted. On Campbell Island, this machine kicked into high gear, and results began showing up within just a few generations. The first thing that changed was the wool. In some sheep, an ancient, long-lost ability started appearing: shedding. Their wool began falling off on its own, in clumps, in spring, like wild rams. This was a return to ancestral genes, dormant in DNA for thousands of years. Sheep able to shed excess wool survived, and their offspring inherited this trait. The second change involved body structure. The island's megaherbs grew waist-high to an adult human. To feed efficiently, you either had to bend constantly or have longer legs and neck. Nature chose the latter. Generation after generation, sheep grew taller, their limbs lengthened, their silhouette changed. By the 1950s, Campbell Island sheep already looked noticeably different from their mainland relatives. They were lean, long-legged, with heads held high. Their muzzles lengthened slightly, jaws became stronger, adapted to chewing tough megaherb stems. Even teeth changed, becoming more wear-resistant. But physical changes weren't the only ones. Behavior evolved, too. Domestic sheep are usually fearful and helpless. They panic at unfamiliar objects and depend on herd instinct. Campbell sheep became cautious but not cowardly. They learned to keep their distance but not flee in panic. Reproduction changed in surprising ways. Regular sheep reach sexual maturity at 6 to 9 months and can have lambs in their first year of life. Campbell sheep started maturing later, after a year. This gave young animals more time to grow strong before first pregnancy and increased offspring survival chances. Even more astonishing was the change in birth process. Domestic sheep usually lie down to deliver a lamb, but on the wet, cold ground of the island, this meant death for the newborn. Campbell sheep started giving birth standing. Lambs fell from height, but at least they didn't drown in icy puddles and immediately got on their feet. Newborn lambs also became different. They stood on their feet within minutes of birth, not hours. They started nursing almost immediately, instinctively understanding that delay was deadly. Weak, slow ones simply didn't survive until evening. Only the strongest, fastest, most viable survive. The population stabilized. After crashing to critical numbers in the 30s and 40s, by the 50s, the flock began growing again. Now, these weren't those helpless domestic sheep brought in half a century ago. This was something new, a hybrid of domestic and wild, created by chance and desperation. By the 60s, more than 2,000 head grazed on the island. They lived in groups of 20 to 30 individuals, moved around the island on seasonal routes, avoided the most dangerous places during storms. They developed their own survival culture, passed from mother to lamb. Scientists from the mainland started getting strange reports from rare island visitors. Sailors who occasionally landed there for repairs or research told of strange sheep. Tall, lean, with disheveled wool sticking out in all directions. Sheep that wouldn't let people closer than 50 meters and ran like wild deer. By the 70s, Campbell Island was declared a nature reserve. The New Zealand government began a program to restore the original ecosystem. Megaherbs that had almost disappeared due to overgrazing started slowly returning to protected areas. But the sheep presented a problem. On one hand, these were invasive animals, destroying the unique flora of the subantarctic island. On the other hand, this was a unique population of enormous scientific interest. Campbell sheep had become a living laboratory of evolution, an example of how quickly a species can change under environmental pressure. Biologists calculated that over 50 years, about 20 sheep generations, changes occurred that under normal conditions would take thousands of years. This was accelerated evolution in action. Genes that had hidden in recessive state for centuries suddenly surfaced and spread through the population. A compromise decision was made. The sheep needed to be destroyed to save vegetation, but first their gene pool needed to be preserved for science. In 1975 and 76, an expedition went to the island. Their task was simple on paper and incredibly complex in practice: catch several sheep alive and deliver them to the mainland. Imagine hunting wild animals in conditions where a helicopter can crash from wind at any moment, where visibility rarely exceeds 100 meters, where every rock is slippery with moisture. Now imagine your prey is sheep weighing close to 70 kilograms that run faster than humans and know the terrain perfectly. The expedition used helicopters for reconnaissance, herding dogs for roundup, and lots of physical strength. The sheep turned out incredibly skittish and fast. They ran from people for several kilometers, scrambled up cliffs where humans could only crawl. Some animals jumped off precipices, preferring the risk of falling to capture. Over 2 seasons of work, they managed to catch 58 sheep. From these, 10 of the healthiest and most typical population representatives were carefully selected. 5 rams and 5 ewes representing the genetic diversity of the flock. The rest had to be released or put down, as transporting that many was impossible. The 10 chosen sheep were equipped with temporary collars and literally carried by hand across impassable sections to the coast. 2 kilometers of rocky terrain with a 70-kilogram animal on your shoulders isn't a walk in the park. Some had to be tied and carried by 4 people on improvised stretchers. On the mainland, the sheep were placed in a special research center. They weren't sheared immediately, giving scientists a chance to study wool structure, its growth, and natural shedding. Blood samples, tissues were taken, genetic analysis conducted. Each animal was literally cataloged from nose tip to tail tip. When the sheep were finally sheared, under dirty matted wool, they found muscular, lean bodies completely unlike the rounded forms of ordinary domestic sheep. These were athletes created by nature for survival. Leg muscles were developed like mountain goats, chest cavity wide, bones strong. Breeding programs began. The goal was to preserve unique genes, but not create a commercial breed. Campbell sheep were bred only among themselves, carefully avoiding inbreeding due to small founder numbers. Every lamb was registered, every mating planned in advance. Research revealed amazing things. Campbell sheep possessed increased resistance to parasites that usually affect domestic sheep. They got pneumonia less often, better tolerated dampness and cold. Their immune system was significantly stronger than regular breeds, possibly the result of decades of selection without veterinary help. The meat of these sheep turned out tough with an unusual taste, which was expected. They weren't bred for dinner, but for wool, and decades of life on a poor diet of tough grasses didn't contribute to marbling. But the wool, though coarse, had unique properties. It barely absorbed water and dried quickly. On the island itself, meanwhile, the drama of the final act unfolded. In 1970, a fence was built across the island, dividing it into northern and southern parts. All sheep in the north, about 1,300 head, were shot by professional hunters. About the same number were left in the south for monitoring. The southern flock continued living and breeding for another decade and a half. Scientists watched how, without competition for food, the population again grew to several thousand head. Megaherbs in the north began recovering, demonstrating how strongly sheep had affected the ecosystem. Plants that hadn't seen sun for decades grew to giant sizes. In the late 80s, the southern flock's turn came. The last several thousand sheep were systematically destroyed. Hunters worked for months, combing every ravine, every valley. Sheep by that time had become so wild and cautious that some had to be tracked for weeks. The last wild sheep of Campbell Island was shot in 1991. 105 years of this species' presence on the island ended. But the story didn't finish. On the mainland lived descendants of those 10 rescued animals, carriers of unique genetic heritage created by chance and natural selection. By the early 2000s, the Campbell sheep population in captivity had grown to several dozen individuals. They were kept on private farms under strict control, like living museum exhibits. Breeders took pride in their unusual animals, showed them at exhibitions, told their incredible story. But in 2017, tragedy struck. 5 rare sheep were stolen from guarded territory and killed. Crime motives remained unclear, possibly simple meat theft, possibly vandalism. For the population, this was a crushing blow. The gene pool was already narrow, and losing 5 adult animals, including pregnant females, was catastrophic. Today in New Zealand, only a few dozen purebred Campbell sheep live. Their owners united in an association, exchange breeding material, try to avoid inbreeding. Each animal is worth its weight in gold. Each lamb is hope for preserving a unique line. Scientists continue research. Modern genome sequencing methods allow seeing exactly which genes changed during those decades of isolation. Researchers find mutations in genes responsible for thermoregulation, immunity, wool structure, metabolism. Each discovery adds details to the picture of lightning-fast evolution. Immune system genes are of particular interest. Campbell sheep demonstrate variations in genes linked to innate immunity, protection from bacterial and viral infections. Perhaps these variants existed in the original population at low frequency and simply spread through selection. Or perhaps these are new mutations that arose on the island. The Campbell sheep story poses many questions for scientists. How fast can evolution proceed in extreme conditions? Which genes are most plastic and easily changed? Can domestic animals return to wild state in a few decades? And most importantly, what does this story tell us about the nature of domestication? Domestication is often viewed as an irreversible process. Domestic animals are considered so changed by artificial selection that they can't survive without humans. Campbell sheep proved this wrong. Even a highly domesticated species retains genetic potential to return to wild lifestyle. This has practical significance for preserving rare breeds. Many traditional livestock breeds are disappearing, displaced by modern commercial lines. But valuable information may hide in their genes, adaptations to specific climates, disease resistance, ability to survive on poor feed. Campbell sheep also remind us of the ecological danger of invasive species. Even seemingly harmless domestic animals can cause enormous damage to unique ecosystems. The island's megaherbs suffered so severely that some species still haven't fully recovered decades after sheep removal. Today, Campbell Island again belongs to wild nature. Megaherbs spread in huge fields, their flowering visible from space. Seabirds nest by the millions, covering slopes in solid carpet. The island is listed as UNESCO World Heritage as a unique example of subantarctic ecosystem. Sometimes researchers visiting the island find strange artifacts, old sheep bones with unusually long legs, clumps of strangely structured wool stuck in rock crevices. This is all that remains of an incredible evolutionary experiment nobody planned, but which changed our understanding of adaptation and survival. The story of Campbell Island sheep is a story about cruelty and hope, about human stupidity and nature's incredible tenacity. It's a reminder that life will find a way to survive even where survival seems impossible. And it's a warning that our actions have consequences that can last decades and centuries. These sheep transformed from helpless domestic animals into tough pioneers capable of withstanding one of Earth's harshest climates. They changed their body shape, blood chemistry, behavior, and instincts. All this happened not over millions of years, but within the lifetime of 2 or 3 human generations. Thanks for being with us on this amazing journey through time and evolution. If this story amazed you, subscribe to the channel and hit like. Write in the comments what you think about this accidental experiment of nature. Could sheep have evolved even further if given more time? What other animals could change so radically in extreme conditions? Share your thoughts and see you in the next video.